Hello everybody and welcome to this, my first of two videos on the Minolta X-570, or as this one says, X-500. They are the same camera, just made for different markets. The X-570 is an interchangeable lens SLR, which means the lens can come off and go on at any point whenever you have film in the camera or not. It has a center-weighted metering, meaning that the central portion of the frame provides the majority of the metering data. Typically with Minoltas, I think it's about 60% of the metering data comes from this area inside my fingers with center-weighted meters. It has shutter speeds of 4 seconds up to 1/1000th of a second, but beyond 1 second, those shutter speeds are only available in automatic mode. In manual mode, you can only set the shutter speed from 1/1000th to a second, and then bulb for anything longer than a second. The viewfinder magnification is 0.9x, meaning that what you see in here is 90% the size of what's going to be on the image. And the frame coverage is 95%, meaning that about 2.5% of the frame on each side is cropped out of the viewfinder. So it's decently good. It's got a good viewfinder. It's fairly bright. It's easy to see things in focus with this camera. The focusing screen in this camera is a split prism. And let's see if we can show you what that looks like. There you can see a reflection of it, meaning it's basically a matte field with a circle in the center, and that circle has a prism in it. And the flash on this camera syncs at 1/60th of a second, which you can tell because the 60th is a red number, and anything slower. And in the second video, we'll talk about why any of the slower shutter speeds work. 1/60th is the fastest shutter speed you can use with a flash and have it be successful in this camera. The Minolta X-500 570 was targeted at advanced amateurs, mid-range users, but it was actually preferred over the X-700, the more advanced and higher level X series camera, by most advanced and especially professional users. The reason being that this does not have a program mode, and most of the advanced and professional users saw no reason to have program mode at all. I agree with that. In general, if you're just starting out and you've got your first camera and you've never handled one before, program mode can be beneficial. But if you know your way around exposures and cameras and things like that, program mode isn't going to do a whole lot for you. One of the other things about this camera is because it does not have a program mode, it's easier to use the legacy lenses on it than on the X700, because if you want to use program mode with a lens like this one, for instance, you're out of luck. This lens does not support program mode, and program mode will not work with this lens on the 700. The X570 was produced by the Minolta Camera Company in Japan from 1983 until 1987. Now, that said, 1987 was the best the best info I could find on this was 83 to 87. I couldn't conclusively say that 100% guaranteed was the range of time in which this camera was produced. I think it's pretty close though. It was preceded by the XGA. It was concurrent with the X370, 600, and 700. And it was followed by the Maxim 5000. Let's take a look at all of the camera's features. This is the top of the camera, but we're going to start on the fronts with these two guys here. These are the strap lugs, and these hold your camera strap. Over here we have the film rewind knob and lever. This is how you rewind the film and open the camera back. This is the ISO dial right here, this little black ring, which allows you to select your film speed, and this is the ISO dial lock, which allows it to unlock so you can select it. We have the off, on with beep button right there. So off means your camera's not going to function. On means it will function, and on beep means it will function and make noise that's going to annoy people around you. Off does not mean that it doesn't drain the batteries. It will still drain the batteries, so just because it's off doesn't mean you can set it down and come back in 3 months and find that your batteries are still good. They probably won't be. Flash hot shoe, serial number. This is your shutter speed and mode dial. Right now it's an auto. Next to it there's a little black indicator that tells you which mode or thing you're set to. This is the shutter release button right here in the center of it. This is your shutter mode unlock button. If it's an auto, you cannot adjust it without pushing this down. Now you can move it. In any of the manual shutter speeds, you can adjust those without pushing the lock down. Here we have the, underneath the film advance, we have the film plane indicator that tells you where the film plane is if you're going to be doing manual exposures and need to calculate very precise distances from film to subject. This is your frame count window right here, and this little doodad, I think, indicates, I don't know what that little doodad does. I didn't see where, I forgot to write it down. Anyway, and then there's a little window right there that does something or another. Whatever it does, it's not vital to the camera's operation. On the front of the camera, take the lens off, that'll help a little bit. Here we have the model number. This is the self-timer and auto exposure combo button. You lift it up for the self-timer and you push it down for automatic exposure memory, for exposure lock. And we'll talk about how to use the exposure lock in the second video. This is the aperture coupling. So what happens is when you adjust the aperture ring on the lens, it moves this coupling, which tells the camera what your aperture ring is set to. Lens mount, lens mounting index button, depth of field preview lever. This is a cable release that you can screw a cable release into because there's not one on the shutter button. So if you want to use a cable release, that's your socket. This is your lens release button. On the back of the camera, we have the film memo holder right here. This is when you load your film, you would tear the top of the box off and slide it in here so you can see what kind of film you have. And then there's an ISO DIN conversion table here. So if you're from Germany and in the US and you buy 400 ISO film, no idea what the DIN on that is. You can see right there, it's 27. This is not as important as it once was now that everyone's gone to ISO basically, and that's the standard worldwide for film. Viewfinder window, and then there's some grooves on the side of it for accessories. On the camera's bottom, we have the power winder electrical contacts. This is the battery chamber, tripod bushing, film release button, and power winder mechanical contact. Inside the camera, we have some really gross light seals. That's disgusting. We have the film cassette chamber. This is where your 35mm cassette is going to go. We have a film guide pin. What this does is help the film as it comes out of the cassette line up properly. These 2 silver rails and then these 6 silver dots are your film guide rails. The dots help prevent the film from moving up and down as it travels, and then the silver ones sandwich up against the film pressure plate to keep your film flat. These 3 gold dots are your data back contacts. So if you take the back of the camera off, you can replace it with a data back, and that's what gives the data back its data. This is your film tension sprocket right here, and this helps to keep the film from sliding backwards through the camera. Right now it's released, but typically it does not move backwards unless you press the film rewind button. This is your film take-up spool. And then on the film back, we have the film pressure plate. This little guy right here sandwiches up against the film here to keep pressure on it as it's going across the sprocket so that it doesn't miss any holes. And then this is your film cassette spring. So it's upside down right now, but this is about how everything would fit together if the camera's back was closed. And then here is the release button to take the camera back on and off. There we go. Some notes on the Minolta X-570. As I mentioned, this was generally preferred by professionals over the 700. And it shared the exact same production platform. So the chassis and the body were the same as the rest of the concurrent X lineup, the 300, which is also called the 370, the 600, and the 700. The differences between all 4 of the X cameras was relatively minor, and it boils down to what's in the viewfinder and what's on the top plate. And then for the 700, there was some extra stuff for the program mode. but you can kind of see that right here. Let's grab a 370. You can see that they're really very similar cameras. Here we go. Same rewind, same button layout. This is mechanically very similar underneath, but has a different fascia on top. And then here we go there. Frame count window, unknown doodad up there. Effectively, these are the same camera with a different top plate, which gives this one the a different interface. Really, I think that's really the majority of it on the top plate here. Anyway, so some things not to do with your Minolta X-500. Don't store your camera with the shutter ready to fire. Anytime you're going to store the camera, always trip the shutter first, because there are springs in here that are under load when you arm the shutter. So if you store it with those springs under load, they're going to be pulled on, and that can impair their ability to work correctly when they're supposed to, and can affect your shutter. So anytime you store it, make sure that you fire the shutter first, then take the batteries out to store it, because if you leave the batteries in, even in off, it's going to drain your batteries. Next thing is, don't touch the shutter inside of the camera. I know it always looks like fun to open it up, put your finger in, and let it close on your finger. It's not, it just ruins the camera. Underneath the lens, don't touch the mirror, because that's a really good way to cause the mirror to lose its silver when your finger oils are on it, because it can tarnish it, and that will impair your ability to focus and also impair the camera's metering. Don't leave your camera or your lenses in your car. If your car gets really hot, the oils in your lenses especially, but also in your camera, will get thin, and then they'll flow to places they shouldn't be, on your lenses especially, onto the aperture blades. Then when they cool down and get back to their proper viscosity on the aperture blades especially, they interfere with the movement of things and can screw up how your camera works. Also, if your camera gets really cold, those oils will get very thick and gummy, and then they'll break down, which can cause them to stay gummy and not lubricate properly. And another thing is, if you leave your camera in your car, that's a really good way to come back to a broken car window and no camera. Even if you're just hopping into the gas station to pay for your tank fill up or whatever, don't leave your camera in your car. Also, don't store your camera gear in a plastic bag or box, because moisture will get into it, and that can cause fungus to grow on the lenses, in the viewfinder, in the leather covering. It smells so bad. It really smells bad. And it also can really ruin your optics and your lens's performance. If you do keep your cameras in a box, like I do, I keep mine in a Pelican box, get some rechargeable desiccant packs and put them in the box with it, because they'll absorb any moisture and will help prevent fungus from growing. Don't let this camera get wet. It's not weather sealed, and water will short out the electronics and ruin your camera. And just remember, your Minolta X-500 or X-570 is a precision tool. So if you handle it with care and respect, as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. All right, so that's it for the first video going over the camera. In the next video, we'll talk about how to use everything and every function. And really, when you finish that video, you'll understand this camera as well as anyone could. So if this video was helpful, give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track and I'm producing content which is useful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those below. Pretty good about responding fairly quickly. If you would like to subscribe and find out when I have more photography videos, please do. And lastly, thank you everyone very much for watching, and I'll see you in video 2.